Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm glad you're here. Today I have a dreamy card for you with a bokeh background. So bokeh is a photography effect, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to create using a simple technique. I have Daniel Smith paints that I'm using today, and I'm working on canson XL watercolor paper, which is 140 pound weight or 300 GSM. This comes in a packet of 9 by 12 sheets. I think there are 30 sheets per pack. And I'm using one of these strips to test out my paints so that I can test how strong the pigment is or how watery or dry my brush is. And that's a tip that I would recommend, that you always have a scrap piece nearby rather than committing your brush and pigment to the paper without testing first. I'm just folding that in half, an 8" by 8" piece folded down the middle at 4 inches. And I have some QZ tape or QZ tape that I purchased from the dollar store. I'm going to take some of the tack off on my clothing, and this is just going to keep the card closed while I work. And it's still bowing in the middle, so I think I'll put an extra piece on as well. Just tear that end off. I don't want too much tape on there. So here is the stamp set. It's called Free as a Bird by Stampinup. Now I'm taking the backing off these two pieces, and I'm going to keep that in the stamp set because these make fabulous masks. If you were to want to do some splattering over the top of your piece, then you can use these little masks. So I always keep them in the stamp set. Now this little image is of the 4 baby birds on the small branch. And I'm using Onyx versafine black ink. This is a waterproof ink. It's my favourite ink to use with line and wash technique, and it is waterproof if you heat set it with a heat tool. Here's Mama Bird going on now. She's going at the end of the branch. And I'll pick her up on the door of my stamp positioner, ink her up with some Onyx black ink. And there's the stamping done. So I need to heat set that because I don't want to smear my work when I start drawing in that branch. So I'm going to be using an ultrafine Sharpie fine point. These are very inexpensive. I just love them for watercolour work because they are waterproof. And I'm just going to extend that branch, and I'm going to keep the same distance on the left and the right so that it is the same distance from the left hand side as the right hand side to keep the picture looking balanced. And I'm just dabbing away and putting little sketchy lines in. So I've taken that very small image of the 4 birds and made it almost double the size by extending that branch and adding the mama bird. And I just want to heat set everything just to make sure we are nice and watertight before we start. So there's my strip of paper, that's my scrap piece. And now I want to tape this down and start painting. So I'll peel off those bits that were keeping it closed because I want to put another frame around it using this tape. I think this tape cost me $2. I'm going to go and buy about 6 rolls of it. I think it was such a great deal. So I'm taking the tack off on my sleeve, as you can see, so that the tape won't tear. I do find sometimes with the canson XL watercolor paper, the tape will tear if you're not extremely careful. So I'm just going to tape that down on all 4 sides, making sure to take the tack off first, and creating a nice even border. I want the border to be a lovely even shape, so I'm taking a little bit of care with how I adhere this to my work surface. Now, if you didn't want to adhere this to your desk, you can adhere it to a board, but I like to adhere it to my desk so I can keep everything in frame. And I'm burnishing the inside with my finger so that we won't have too many leaks. Now I have a Chux magic eraser. I have a large piece and a piece that I've cut into a smaller piece. I have a size 12 maple sable round brush and a size 2 maple sable round brush. And these are the two brushes I'll be using. And my Chux Magic Eraser is in a little bowl of clear water. Now I'm cleaning off my stamps with a baby wipe, and I'm also going to check my fingers because this is usually where I end up with ink on my fingers, and I do not want to transfer that to my work. This is the colour chart for my Daniel Smith paints, and I'm specifically looking for non-staining colours. Buff titanium is non-staining, yellow ochre, burnt sienna is non-staining, cobalt turquoise and raw sienna light are all non-staining colours. I really like this cobalt turquoise. I think that's going to be nice. That's one colour I'd like to use. I think raw sienna light would really complement that beautifully, and burnt sienna would make a beautiful warm brown tone. As a watercolour artist, I love working with a limited palette, so I like to only have 3 colours at most, and that's why I've chosen these colours. I'm going to give this a spritz with my spray bottle. In retrospect, I think I should have spritzed this before I started rolling the camera because it doesn't really give the paints enough chance to activate. So I really have to scrub away with my brush to get these out of the palette. So there's that lovely cobalt turquoise, and I'm going to just put some on my palette here. I have lots of water on my brush, and I'm adding more water from my water jar and really scrubbing into that half pan to remove the pigment onto my palette. I made a similar card to this with a different background technique using the Gansai Tambi paints by Kuretake, and they are very similar in colours to this. However, the Daniel Smith paints are a professional quality paint, and they are really beautiful to work with. I also have the Winsor & Newton professional paints as well. I love both brands, but today I'm using Daniel Smith, but you could use whatever watercolours you have. This is raw sienna light, which is a non-staining paint, so I'm going to mix up some of that next. And if you're not sure whether your paints are staining or granulating or non-staining, use some scrap paper and play with them first. And then when they're dry, try lifting them with that magic eraser. And if you can lift them without damaging your paper, then that's probably okay. Some really heavy staining pigments would be difficult to lift using this technique, so I'm steering away from anything that is a high staining paint. And this is burnt sienna, another non-staining paint, and it's a gorgeous brown. I do love these 3 colours. I think they work so well together. Now, I'm not going to be mixing these colours to create other colours. I'm going to pretty much lay them down as they are. I'll let them organically blend into each other, but I'm going to be using the straight pigment without any mixing. Now, I have a clean water jar because I want to put clean water across my entire panel with the side of my number 12 round brush. And I usually cross-hatch just in case I've missed a bit that I can't see. And now I'm going to tap some of that off because it's starting to pool at the bottom there. And I'm going to remove some of the standing water from my panel. This is important because if it's too watery, you're just going to have the paint running everywhere. You want the paper wet, but not soaking. So I'm just testing with that scrap piece, liking those colours, and look how fast you can work with this. And I think the secret to success with this technique is to work fast and loose. Now I'm bringing in the cobalt turquoise, and I'm mainly just dotting it around the centre and then adding some pieces of that colour right throughout the panel. And what I'm aiming for is balance between the 3 colours. I want about the same amount of each colour across my panel. But it's messy, it's loose, it's fast, and it's free. And that's the style that I love for this technique. and it's very easy to do. Just adding in a little bit of colour here and there where I can see some white of the paper showing through. Excuse my little dog, he's making some strange sounds there behind me. And I'm just going to wipe away the edge of the tape with tissue. I'm not wiping onto the card itself, I'm just taking the excess paint off the masking tape. And now I'm going to heat set it with my heat tool. And now I'm just adding a little bit more definition to the birds and the branch. I'm staying away from the background now because I want the birds and the branch to come forward. And I'm adding a little bit of brown here and there. It's still very loose, very free. I'm going outside the lines deliberately. And this adds to that dreamy charm of this kind of painting. Just putting some definition to the leaves, but still keeping it loose and messy. You can see me taking the water off my brush there so it's much drier, so that when I come in with more pigment, it will be a darker colour. It won't be so diluted with the water. Just tapping in where the flowers are very loosely. And then taking it further around the piece, adding a little to each of the bodies, again staying loose and not letting the colours mix, just letting it organically flow on the paper. And I'm almost done with the painting. Just a tiny bit more detail in those yellow flowers. And now I can dry it completely with my heat gun, and I want it to be completely dry at this point. Now I'm taking a piece of paper towel and I'm bringing in a circles template. So this has lots of different sizes circles on it. You can get these from stationery stores, from drafting supplies, office works, places like that. They're not very expensive. And it has lots of different size circles. So I'm now taking my magic eraser and squeezing out the excess water. And I'm just going to very gently rub inside one of those circles. Now you don't want to scrub at this. You just want to rub around and then blot it with your paper towel and wipe the back of the template, because you don't want to pick up a wet template and then spread water all around this piece, or you'll end up disturbing the pigment. It's just a gentle wipe around, and you can see how effective that is. Because they're non-staining colours, they lift off really well. So I'm going to just each time squeeze out the excess water, gently dab at the circle, and keep making sure that the paper remains dry, that you're not transferring moisture from the back of the template around the page. I just keep wiping the back of the template with a paper towel. You can see how easily this lifts all those lovely shapes, and this is where that dreamy background really starts coming to life. I'm looking for just random places pretty much. I'm changing the size of the circles so that it can look very much like that traditional photography bokeh effect. And I'm just squeezing out that piece of the Chux magic eraser because it had a little bit of paint on it. So I put it in my other jar for that. And keep blotting your work so that there are no water droplets on, otherwise you might cause some cauliflower blooms to form, and you don't want that. This is all about the bokeh. Soft and dreamy. Now I do have a template for the envelope for this card in my previous video. If you don't have an envelope punch board to make your own envelope for a slimline card, My tip is to take a standard business size envelope, very carefully deconstruct it by pulling it apart, and then just trace the template onto a nice piece of scrapbook paper, which is what I use for my envelopes. I use the 12-inch by 12-inch scrapbook paper, and just choose something that matches the colours that you're using. I love slimline cards. I think they are large enough to showcase the work that you've put into them. Now this is coming together. It's almost done. So I'm blotting it up and giving it a final hit with the heat tool. And this does two things. Firstly, it dries it off, but it also loosens the masking tape so that it won't tear. So if you heat set it, that really helps the masking tape lift off. I'm still being careful. I'm holding it close to my surface as I peel it up, and I'm going slowly. But I haven't torn any of it, so that's great. Now there are some little bleeds in the corners, but I'm not concerned about that at all because I can use the same technique as I used for the bokeh effect. And I'm just tapping, I'm not scrubbing, I'm just tapping on these corners, and the paint comes off really easily because it is non-staining pigment. So that cleans up beautifully. Look how gorgeous that background is. And the little birds are strong enough to hold the main event. They are the stars of the show. And just dabbing off any moisture there, and give it a final hit with the heat tool. So I'm going to use this strip of scrap paper, and I'm going to stamp the sentiment that says, "The world needs more of you." I think that is very fitting for this card. So I'm going to put that in the stamp positioner and stamp it on using the same Onyx black ink, and I'm just going to cut it down using my paper snips. I don't want too much white showing because this is all about the bokeh effect on the card. So that's about the right size. I'm going to flag the right-hand side. So to make a little flag, cut up to the halfway point and then flag it out. And then I'm going to cut down the edge so that there's no excess white showing, but you can still read the message. Now, I've got out my Tombow multi-glue and it's quite empty, so it looks like I'm putting a huge amount of glue on here. I just can't get it to run out. It's right at the bottom of the container. It's almost dry, but I did manage it. So I'm going to put that on and put a weight over the top of it so that it will set and it will adhere really well. So this is the other card that I made. This is using a splatter effect, but it's also a line and wash technique on a slimline card, and they both fit in the same envelope. So I am absolutely thrilled with how this turned out. Give this bokeh effect a try. It's lots of fun. If you didn't have a circle template, you could perhaps use a sponge dauber. I hope you'll join me again next time for some more watercolour painting and card making. Have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to subscribe and leave a like. It really helps, guys, more than you know. And I do appreciate each and every one of you. Bye for now.